Hello and welcome to Business Live. Coming up tonight, a quest to ensure macroeconomic stability and stem the tide of rising inflation sees the policy rate increase from 17 to 19%.
It is a difficult time for all of us. Inflation is a canker and it affects the poorest most. The poorest households are the ones who feel it most.
An exclusive interview with the first Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Maxwell Poku Afari, on concerns about the impact of the 19% interest rate on the growth and credit extension to commercial banks.
Every medicine has a side effect, and so the question really is striking a balance between inflation volatility and growth volatility.
But what's the response from industry watchers? We have the Association of Ghana Industries together with the Ghana Chamber of Commerce and Industry on standby for a detailed discussion. Also in the bulletin, $1.5 billion earmarked for food support in Africa amid global food crisis. We have more from the annual general meeting of the African Development Bank.
We'll spend for this plan $1.5 billion US. That's how much we're going to spend. He said, but you're going to produce $12 billion worth of food. Is there a mathematician here? What leverage is that? That is an incredible leverage.
Stay with us for more. We begin with commodities. Tonight, the Bank of Ghana has justified the policy rate hike, insisting it was needed to help contain the rising inflation. This is coming after the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana increased its key lending rates to 19%. George Riafi monitored the meeting and has come through with this report.
The Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Addison, maintained that the rate hike should help slow the rate of inflation going forward.
It is a difficult time for all of us. Inflation is a canker and it affects the poorest most. The poorest households are the ones who feel it most. And this is why the MPC had taken the decision to decisively do all that we can, using the tools that are at our disposal to bring it down as quickly as possible. Well, the question about the slight pressure on the foreign exchange over the weekend, as you know, we are running a flexible exchange rate arrangement, and you would tend to see these movements in the exchange rate from time to time. The Bank of Ghana has intervention packages both for the BDCs and for other sectors every other fortnight or every fortnight.
He also maintained that they are getting the necessary complementary policy measures on the part of government to help deal with the current situation.
After the last MPC meeting, the Ministry of Finance also came out with measures to control government spending, an additional 10% cut to the 20% decision that had been made. So we were told that you would see very big adjustment in government spending. That action is supposed to complement the monetary policy action and help drive inflation down. So both the monetary side and the fiscal side, I believe, are acting in concert.
But has the economy recovered from the shocks of COVID-19? This is what the governor had to say.
And therefore, anything that the central bank does to bring inflation down is growth supportive. We are actually supporting growth by trying to manage the inflation rate. So I don't believe that policy measures that try to raise interest rates are necessarily not supportive.
Dr. Ernest Addison also had some assurances for businesses that were worried about the recent spike in the cedi depreciation against the dollar just last week. The governor of the Bank of Ghana also maintained that they are committed to taking the necessary measures to help check inflation and help stabilize the economy going forward.
Development, the first Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Ofare, has been reacting to concerns raised about the impact of the growth and credit extension to commercial banks. He's been speaking to George Rafi.
Our assessment shows very clearly that inflation is now very broad-based. Out of the over 300 items in a basket, close to about 267 all had their prices increasing significantly. So it's not a one-sided source of inflation. It's become very broad-based. We saw food inflation going up, but we also saw non-food inflation going up at a faster rate than food inflation. And that alone also tells you that if non-food inflation is beginning to pick up at a faster rate than food inflation, that means it's becoming embedded in the way we price. And evidence out there will see how prices are going up. We also saw our core measures of inflation, which looks at underlying inflationary pressures, all of them jumping or moving up very significantly. So that gave a sense to the committee, as the governor, the chairman of the committee said in the press conference, that gave a sense to the committee the broad-based nature of inflation and the need for monetary policy to quickly and decisively address this broad-based nature of inflation, which is becoming embedded in the way we price goods and services. And that shows that the second-round effect is taking hold. And if monetary policy does not quickly address that, it will begin to impact the real sector significantly.
The chairman of the Monetary Policy Committee did admit that indeed the inflation spike could be largely driven by a supply side issue. If it's indeed a supply side issue, then are we not misfiring our arsenal when we do some squeezes? We should tackle a demand-driven inflation.
No, Mr. Rafi, you are very right. And the chairman said it, that the sources are coming from the supply side. But you recall that just in about a few seconds ago, I said that we look at how this begin to become embedded, because the monetary policy all over the world do not normally target supply side effects. Because when you have a supply side shock, it happens like administered price increase this month. Within 12 months, the base drift effect takes it out of the pricing system. So it wouldn't be prudent for monetary policy to target that supply side shock. But when that supply side shock is becoming embedded in the way we price, and it begins to affect non-food inflation, it affects core inflation, which is gone beyond the first round, but the second round becoming embedded and underlying inflation is going up. That is where monetary policy goes. And so, as I said in my earlier response, based on the assessment the committee went through, we saw all the underlying core measures of inflation going up significantly. We saw the rate at which non-food inflation is increasing at a faster pace than even food inflation. And we saw the contribution of each of the key items in the basket, which captures the supply shock. If you look at their contribution, then you can see the contribution coming from the demand pressures are increasing at a faster rate, showing that there is room for monetary policy to quickly address the demand pressures that are building up and propagating very fast.
You took some measures previously that was quite sharp with other monetary and then the macroprudential measures and all those things. We've seen this other hike as well. The government is still talking about the fact that we might see inflation go up, but at a moderate rate. When should we start seeing the results of these monetary and macroprudential measures that the Monetary Policy Committee has taken for us to indeed appreciate the approach that you've adopted in checking inflation rate?
George, you see, the framework we are using is what we call the forward-looking monetary policy framework, which means we're looking at the inflation forecasting framework going forward. And decisions we take today is actually aimed at a time lag horizon down the line to see where the inflation forecast is going to be. Let's say 12 months horizon time, where is the inflation going to be? And we need to take decision now to be able to contain that underlying pressure down the line. So
well, you heard the Dr. Maxwell Pokofare allaying concerns about the impact of a 19% policy rate on the growth and credit extension to commercial banks. But in all of this, industry watchers are anxious about the cost of production, which continues to escalate. Ahead of the announcement, the Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mark Bedu-Abuaji, had spelled out the impact of any policy rate adjustment on the cost of doing business, saying passing on extra production costs to consumers is the only move left. Well, he joins us together with the Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Ghana Industries. We're grateful, gentlemen, that you could join us. I want to start off with you, Mr. Chuma Kwabwa. Definitely 19% increase by about 2 percentage points. 2 basis points, actually. What's the response of the AGI to this with respect to the impact on local industries?
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon and evening to your viewers. Definitely, the impact.
I think we're having issues with Chuma Kwabwa's connection, but let me hop on to Mark Bedu-Abuaji, CEO of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Grateful that you could join us. Dr. Ernest Addison says the reason for increasing the policy rate from 17 to 19% is to ensure macroeconomic stability and stem the tide of rising inflation. Now, these are 2 key factors that actually determine the temperature of Ghana's business environment. I want your analysis on this from an industry perspective.
I think from our end, we are a bit disappointed with the increment, because our initial analysis on the sources of inflation clearly indicates where it's coming from, and that is the supply side constraint. So we made it clear, of which we also communicated to the central bank, that it may not be appropriate to immediately increase the policy rate, but to look at other supply side constraints and how we can incentivize the private sector to produce more, so especially from the food side. So we were actually not expecting an increment at this stage, but it has happened. But cumulatively, for the past 2 months, you realize that there have been over 4.5% increase in policy rates, and that's put a lot of pressure on businesses as well. Anytime the policy rate goes up, a lot of things happened, and the effect is largely felt by the private sector. They have their opinion, but we are also talking from the real sector and from the perspective of the private sector. One, the interest rate is likely to go up, even with the initial increment of 2.5% in March. We have witnessed an increase in interest rates, and the pass-through is not fully yet. We are expecting that it will increase further. So with that further increase in 200 basis points of 2%, we are expecting a very huge increase in interest rates, and that will affect the cost of production of businesses. The other effect also is the possibility of the high rates of the crowding out of the private sector. Anytime there is an increase in the monetary policy rate, the treasury bill rate also goes up significantly. So with a 4.5% increase to 19%, we are expecting that the treasury bill rate will also go up. And we have a trend where anytime the treasury bill rate goes up, you get the banks, instead of lending to the private sector, prefer to give money to the central bank or to government. So all the money that is supposed to go to the private sector to enhance their activity as a working capital and also as capital to expand their businesses, because the treasury bill rate is risk-free, the banks prefer to give the money to the central bank at the expense of the private sector. And this is going to affect businesses because we are not going to have money. One, even if you do, it's going to be at a higher cost. The initial one of 2.5 increase in March actually has triggered a tightening of credit to the private sector, as is being indicated in the report. So largely, the effect is so obvious, and we are waiting to see how businesses will react accordingly.
Indeed. Let's bring in Sechuma Kwabwa of the Association of Ghana Industries. I'm afraid we have lost him there. But Mark, threats to inflation are being felt world over, not just Ghana, considering existing geopolitical development influencing the cost of food and fuel particularly. What particular instrument, from the Chamber's perspective, should be deployed in the short to medium term to ease the cost of doing business in Ghana, aside from increasing the policy rate?
Well, we were actually looking at certain tax incentives, also certain targeted financial support to certain sectors of the economy, like the manufacturing sector and the agri sector as well. You could see that you have also witnessed an increase in the inflation for the imported goods, which means that there is now a wake-up call or an urgency for us to begin to produce most of the things that we import to avoid the imported inflation. So if you had started quite earlier, then probably we would have been able to solve most of the problems, i.e. the things that we are importing. So let's look at most of the things that we import. Do we have the capacity, of which we know we do? How do we provide support to these industries to be able to produce, to meet at least local demand? So when there are challenges in the external market, we will actually be able to insulate ourselves to a large extent with the local production, so we don't import inflation as well. So for me, the monetary policy increment for us, we're actually against, but we're looking at support to the private sector, to businesses, to be able to produce most of the things that we are importing and consuming locally in our country.
Grateful that you could join us, Mark Abuaji, CEO of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Let's now connect via phone this time around with Sechuma Kwabwa of the Association of Ghana Industries. Mr. Kwabwa, grateful that you could join us. Of course, I believe you listened to the conversations had with the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. But from industry's perspective, to what extent can this have in the short to medium term in terms of an impact on Ghana's local industry? Because you hear the BOG's governor say that, increasing policy rate is to stem the tide of inflation and create a stable macroeconomic environment. These are two factors that actually determine the environment of business in Ghana. So what's the AGI's analysis on this?
Well, thank you very much. It's unfortunate I dropped off along the line and I missed the point made by my colleague from Chamber of Commerce. But the point I was making is that whilst appreciating the concerns of Bank of Ghana and using the policy rate as an important tool to stem down inflationary rate, the effect is also obvious to industry and business. And the effect is simple. The fact is that once you increase the policy rate, interest rates also increases because the major determinant of the level of interest rates that the bank charge to businesses. So once we increase the policy rate, expect that interest rates will go up. And when interest rate goes up, it means cost of borrowing is going up. And that leads to contraction in providing loans to businesses. Because on one hand, it is very difficult for the businesses to borrow at that high cost because it adds to their cost of doing business. And then on the other hand, even when the funds are provided, the business themselves are a bit reluctant to borrow at that high cost. And especially if it's for medium to long-term business. You can borrow over 25% to do medium to long-term business. So in situations like this, we should appreciate that it will lead to contraction of loans to businesses. And that has its implications because if you are not giving so much loan to businesses to multiply and develop and contribute to the economy, then it means you are causing contraction there. And that even has an implication on tax revenue of the country. So, but I appreciate the comments made by the governor that these are difficult times, and I think he acknowledges that these are difficult times. So these measures, I believe, Well, they probably handle the immediate situation of curbing inflation, but it doesn't solve our problem at all because it's going to cause contraction in access to bank finance for business. The other aspect we keep saying is that if you want to really resolve this matter, that's why we should look inward and produce a lot of the goods we consume in the country. In a situation like this, if we are producing so much of our local products, we are consuming so much of our local products, and we are not depending so much on import. Bear in mind that part of the reason why inflation is high is because we are importing so much. So there's a bit of imported inflation in the elements of our calculation. If we're able to produce so much locally, then we reduce that aspect of the inflation, in which case it will not require all these policy-based increases in order to cut down the inflation. So we need to really work hard as a country in producing more of the goods we consume and then consuming more of the goods we produce and reduce inflation in imports as much as possible. And that has been the cry of industry, and is the reason why when government comes out with policy that is not consistent with the industrial development agenda, then we have a challenge and we comment on it. So I think as a strategy, let's continue to work towards local production and consuming more of the goods we produce locally, and then reduce imported inflation, which will then require policy-based increases.
Sachima Kwabwa, we're grateful for your analysis on this. Apparently it's quite clear, industry not just, update with exactly what the BOG has put out in terms of the increase in policy rate by 200 basis points. We shall continue to keep this updated, you updated for more on this. Well, away from that, today began the annual general meeting of the African Development Bank, where $1.5 billion was attributed to food support in the production of, cereals in the continent to avert an imminent food shortage. But aside from that has been the import of infrastructure. Take a listen to this report by my colleague Ebenezer Sabute on the interest of the AFD to expand infrastructure in Ghana and the rest of the region.
The African Development Bank supported the resettlement of some persons affected by the construction of the Pokwase interchange through the government of Ghana's Economic Empowerment Initiative. The project, which was completed last year, saw the relocation of about 1,000 settlers and businesses along its surrounding communities. After media tour of the project by the bank, resident engineer Kwame Bimpong told journalists that all efforts are being made to ensure that the affected persons are not worse off.
For those who had economic activities, we ensured that they were adequately compensated, because that is the whole idea, not to make you worse off. You want to make you better. So if you were even on tabletop, we ensured, and then maybe also to add, that we provided markets for them. Markets, when you go in the market, we had some land and moved them. So we're not just moving them and leaving them without any economic activity. Now, right behind this fourth tier, when you go down there, we've also provided a terminal for the trotros and the taxis. There are two of them. One is up there and one is down there. We are yet to commission that. So invariably, those who were affected by the project negatively were adequately compensated.
Accompanying the team, infrastructure engineer and head of task at the African Development Bank office in Ghana, Sheila Enyonam Achia, hinted that the bank is committed to preserving livelihoods and biodiversity at every infrastructure site.
From the sacred grove, we created a reservoir so that they could take that safely. We have commercial vehicle operators that used to work at certain nodes in the project. We created car parks for them under the project so that they can still be able to do their work. Like I said, make sure that we are leaving the people we come to meet in a better off situation than we came to meet them.
The Pokwase Interchange project is one of the bank's landmark investments in Ghana since its establishment.
And we have more news on myjoyonline.com, but I'll leave you with international business news. I'm Charles Ayitey. Many thanks for watching.